Hello friends, welcome to Children's Liturgy. I'm really glad you're here. Let's begin together with a prayer, and I'm going to have Tim zoom right in on the words so that we can say those words together. If you're beginning to read, you can follow along, and if you're already a reader, which I know so many of you are, please pray with me. Holy God, we know you love everyone and call us to love each other too. Help us be genuine, honest, and real with our love, even when it's hard. Help us show our love through action. Amen. Thank you for praying with me. So, we are encouraged to be like Jesus, who loved the whole world so much and didn't seem to mind if someone was different than he was, if it was someone he'd never met before. As soon as he met a new person, he looked right in their eyes and they looked right back at him, and they began to get to know each other. And in that process, it seemed like Jesus always found a way to see the goodness in people and love people. I think we're encouraged to be like that too. In fact, the letters that St. Paul wrote to many of the people long ago when they were just beginning to form communities and churches, he would write letters to encourage them. And this week, one of the things that we have that we're reading in church is called a letter to the Romans. And remember, Rome is a big city in Italy. So there was a community, and Paul wanted to encourage people. And if you print off your coloring sheet from the computer, you'll just get the black and white version, and then you can decorate it any way you'd like. The bulletin is the same way. But let's look at some of these words. I'm going to put the color version out here, and Tim might want to come right on back and look at some of those words, some of these phrases. We heard this in the prayer. Let love be genuine. Genuine, something that's very real. And then we have lots of other phrases, and these are all in this letter that Paul wrote to the church in Rome. Some of these phrases are: hold fast to what is good, love one another, rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering. Suffering is when something is hard or painful. Persevere in prayer. We know to persevere is to keep going, to not give up, to keep going. Extend hospitality. Remember how important hospitality was just for survival for people who lived in the desert. And we're reminded today how important it is for us to be hospitable, be open to meeting new people and bringing them into our lives and our community. What else does Paul say? He says, bless, don't repay evil with evil. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony. Live peaceably. Overcome evil with good. Those are so many big ideas, and those are all important ideas. I was looking at this and I thought to myself, wow, you could almost say, I am going to think about one of these ideas maybe for a whole week and just think about it and maybe talk about it. What do those words mean? What does it mean to be genuine? Maybe think of all the things you can think of about being genuine, about being real and authentic. Maybe all of the stories you know where someone is genuine. Maybe listening for the news. Where do you see people doing things in the world that are genuine? So, if you wanted to read the story or read the letter that Paul wrote to the Romans, you would get out your Bible. Remember this great big Bible, it's kind of heavy. This one is called the Learning Bible. And our bulletin tells us where to look. It's Romans chapter 12, verse 9 through 21. That's a lot of verses. One of the things I was looking at when I was reading this was that Paul says, be friendly with everyone. Don't be proud and feel that you are smarter than others. Make friends with ordinary people. Well, I don't know who isn't ordinary. I think we're all ordinary people. But he says, don't mistreat someone. Don't treat someone badly. Don't mistreat someone who has mistreated you. Now that's a hard thing to do. And Jesus talked about things like that also, because he said, love your enemy, just like you love your friends. Boy, that's a hard thing to do sometimes. But remember, when we hear the 10 best ways to live, we also remember that God did not give us the 10 easy ways to live, but the 10 best ways to live. And then when Jesus came into the world, Jesus said, and I have another way to say the 10 best ways to live. And that is love God and love your neighbors as yourself. And when he used the words neighbor or neighbors, he didn't say, and just the ones you really like, or just the ones who are on your soccer team, or just the ones you go to church with. No. We know from listening to all of the stories about Jesus, about how big his heart was for the whole world, that our neighbors are all of the people of the world. And we're entrusted to all of creation, everything that God created. Lots of responsibility. So that's why I wanted to say, sometimes we read things and it's all important, but it's a lot to take in. So if you want to think about one little piece at a time, that's okay. Because sometimes that gives you a chance to let something go really deep into your heart and into your mind and your spirit. And then, like our prayer, where did our prayer go? Like our prayer, our love might turn into action. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to say things and tell people about things, but I think the things that really make a difference are the things that we do in the world. And when people see what we do, they really know what we're all about. I have a fun story to share with you. I don't know if you see what's on my table here. See what I made, and when I say I made it, I mean I heated it up. I didn't make it. It was frozen, but I put it in my oven, and my kitchen smelled so good this afternoon. So I made a cherry pie. I have a story to share with you, and we're going to watch it together on the computer. It's not about making a cherry pie. It's a book called Enemy Pie. I wonder what that could mean. Let's watch it together, and we can talk about it. Here we go. Enemy Pie.
Welcome to Book Pals, Storyline Online, brought to you by the Screen Actors Guild Foundation. My name is Camryn Manheim. You may know me from the practice, but I hope not, because it was on way past your bedtime. Today, I'm going to read Enemy Pie written by Derek Munson and illustrated by Tara Calahan King. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in the backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been the perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood, right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out at the baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline. I wasn't even invited, but my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse, where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too. But he knew a good way to get rid of them, and I asked him to tell me how. "Tell you how? I'll show you how," he said. And he pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. And inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. And Dad held it up and he squinted at it. "Enemy pie," he said, satisfied. You may be wondering what exactly is in enemy pie. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret, he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic, and I begged him to tell me something, anything. "I'll tell you this," he said. "Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies." Of course, that got my mind working. What kind of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he needed those. I gave him the gum that I'd been chewing on all morning. He gave it right back to me. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck up on the roof. I threw a boomerang, it never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was gonna be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it was gonna look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. I went in to ask my dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. "If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it," he said. I could tell he had made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked like plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out, or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked my dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. "There's one part of enemy pie that I can't do, and in order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross, and then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house, and I knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood at the other side of the screen door, and he looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. "Can you play?" I asked. And he looked confused. "I'll go ask my mom," he said. And he came back with the shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. "You boys stay out of trouble," she said, smiling. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighborhood girls. But we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch, and after lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange. I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course, I couldn't tell my dad that, since he'd been working so hard to make the enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished that he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house into the backyard. And when we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And Jeremy Ross wanted in. "Can we go in it?" he asked. I knew he was going to ask me that, but he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list, and enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me how to throw a boomerang, and he did have me over for lunch. He did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. "Okay," I said, "but hold on." I climbed up ahead of him and I tore the enemy list off the wall. Whew. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, but when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him. But somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about the enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie, and I watched as he cut it into 8 thick slices. "Dad," I said, "it sure is nice to have a new friend in the neighborhood." I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy, but Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream, and he passed one to me and one to Jeremy. "Wow," Jeremy said, looking at the pie. "My dad never makes pie like this." It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. "Jeremy, don't eat it. It's bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something." And Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth, and he crumpled his eyebrows and he looked at me funny. I felt so relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. "Well, if it's so bad," Jeremy asked, "then why has your dad already eaten half of it?" Well, I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. "Good stuff," he mumbled through a mouthful, and that was all he said. And I sat there watching him eating enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing, Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough. So I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he was going to teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or their breath turns bad. I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy.
Enemy pie. Do you think you would like to take a bite of enemy pie? Can you imagine making enemy pie? Can you imagine spending the day with someone you're not really sure you're friends with, or that you could be friends with? Sounds like a kind of a hard thing to do, doesn't it? But maybe, once you get together, you start to find out you have some things in common. And even if you don't, maybe you could still enjoy each other. Sometimes it's fun to be around people who are very different. So I'll take this cherry pie and put it over here, and maybe we'll have some of that later tonight at my house. Did you like that story? I like the way it seemed like the father in that story had maybe thought about some of the same things that his son was thinking about. And I think that's the way things are. I think generation to generation, grandparents and parents and children, we all have our own life, and we all have to learn certain things. And sometimes we can learn a lot from people who have come before us, but sometimes the really important work we have to do ourselves. We have to pay attention to what we can learn from people who came before us, and then we have to do our own work and practice all of those important things, like trying to love our enemies and loving our friends and loving our neighbors. This last weekend, or this last week I should say, earlier in the week, many people remembered and celebrated the day in 1963 when Dr. King made a very important speech. That speech had one key idea or theme, and it was his dream. I have a dream. And it was his dream not just for himself, but for our country. This book that we have in our library at the church is a beautiful book because it has illustrations by many, many different artists. And for different parts of the speech, there's a different picture or illustration. Tim's going to come and take a little look at this picture while I read one part of the speech that he gave that day. He says, "I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood." This picture reminded me a little bit of our mural at St. Michael's, where we come together and usually have our children's liturgy. People coming together from all different parts and sharing a meal. Does that remind you of church? Here's another picture. I'm going to read one other part of his speech. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." Those girls are having a wonderful time dancing, aren't they? Here's another illustration of a dream of when the world would be made beautiful by hope and justice and brotherhood. And when you hear that word brotherhood, don't think that that means it's just about boys. That's one of those words that means people coming together and being kind. So you could say brotherhood and sisterhood, but that's one of those words that is inclusive. It really does mean for boys and girls. And then there's just one last picture. This is a photograph of Dr. King. You can see he's speaking with energy. He's speaking with a lot of passion. I think what he's saying is important. You can see how focused he is. We still remember the words of Dr. King, just like we remember many of the words that we attribute to Jesus. Those words that are filled with hope and love and encouraging us to be the very best people we can be so that we can be God's people in the world. I wanted to remind you of this picture that I have that says, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. So it may seem like a little thing to talk about. Are you friends with someone? Is there somebody in your neighborhood you're having an argument with, or you're not getting along, and you have trouble sharing your toys or playing games with them? That may be in the scheme of things that doesn't seem that important. But I think it's all important. I think how we treat everyone, one person to another person, one household to another household, one city to another city, one country to another country. It all starts with that one person. And sometimes, like Dr. King, one person's idea maybe can capture the hearts and minds of a whole country and help a whole country full of people try to do better. I found a prayer I'm going to share with you. It's from our book called Common Prayer for Children and Families. And I don't think we've read this prayer before, but I thought about this in terms of kind of the hopes and dreams that I think Dr. King had and that so many of us still have. And this prayer is called, "Teach us to hunger and thirst for justice." Life-giving God, we give you thanks for the food we are about to eat. So this is a prayer that you could say before you eat. It could be a prayer you say before you gather at your own table at home or with friends. We give you thanks for the food we are about to eat, for the earth, animals, and people that made this meal possible. Teach us to hunger and thirst for justice. Help us to share what we have with others and fill us with your power to make the world a better place. Amen. So, when we ask to be filled with God's power, I want you to think about what that power might be. Would it be the power to always be the first in line? Would it be the power to always, always get to be the person who decides what movie you get to see? Would it be the power to maybe know that there's enough in the world for everyone if we share? There is enough if we share. And there is enough so that when the power of love overcomes the love of power, then the world will know peace. I think we'll have better friendships and a better future for all the children, just like Dr. King hoped for. So one more time, let's take a really quick peek at some of these words and ideas that we had today from the letter that Paul wrote to the Romans. I wonder if there's a word out of all of these words that you think is most important. I see the word love, and I see the word harmony, live in harmony. And I see the words hold fast to what is good. And friends, I want you to think about that. Especially, I know it's hard right now when we all wish that life was normal so that we could go back to school, go to church together in our church building, see our grandparents or our family who we don't see very often. But don't despair. Hold fast to what is good. And what is good is there are so many people working so hard to try to make the world better, to find a vaccine for the COVID disease. And so I don't want you to feel like things will never change. It's just taking a lot longer than maybe we hoped it would. In the meantime, friends, hold fast to what is good and think about being your most loving and genuine self, because wherever you find yourself, you're making a difference in the world. Even if you never leave your house, you're making a difference in the world by the way you act, by the way you treat your family and your pets and the people you talk to on the phone and the mail, what you say to the person who drops off your mail or packages on your porch. You can make a difference. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope you remember to let your love and your light shine. And I really look forward to seeing you in September. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.